The marble floors of the Bennett mansion gleamed with a cruel perfection, each tile reflecting a world that had died 3 winters ago when they buried her father. Kendra worked on her hands and knees in the entrance hall, watching crystal rainbows dance from the chandelier overhead, while the scent of white roses and her stepmother's expensive perfume filled the air thick enough to choke on. The creditors had arrived again, their briefcases heavy with promises of foreclosure, and Kendra had become invisible in the house where she was born. Kendra. The way Vanessa spoke her name made it sound like an accusation. The click of stilettos on stone announced her stepmother's approach long before she appeared, a woman who'd managed to spend a dead man's fortune before the headstone had even been engraved. "Stop wasting time and deal with Tiana's bathroom," Vanessa commanded, her voice carrying that particular venom she reserved for moments when no witnesses were present. "And stay in the shadows where you belong. You look like something the cat dragged in." "Yes, ma'am." The words tasted like ash, but Kendra had learned that compliance was the only shield she had against worse cruelties. Vanessa swept past in a cloud of Chanel and contempt, heading toward Tiana, who lounged in the sitting room like royalty in cream silk that cost more than the casket they'd lowered their father into. Her stepsister embodied a particular kind of beauty that felt weaponized, all sharp edges and practiced smiles. Tonight was meant to be Tiana's sacrifice, the family's golden ticket to freedom from crushing debt. They'd sold her to Kang Tae-jin, the youngest crime lord in the city's Korean underworld, a man who ruled from a wheelchair, with tattoos mapping his skin and frost in his soul. They assumed they were condemning Tiana to a living hell. They had no idea that in a city full of predators, the man who couldn't stand was the most dangerous hunter of all. They traded her like livestock to save themselves, but he became the only safe harbor she'd ever known. Would you surrender everything to a devil if he was the first person who ever recognized your value? Before I continue, I want to know where you're tuning in from. Leave it in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button. Now let's get back to our story. The shadows in the Bennett mansion didn't just collect dust. They harbored ghosts of better times when the air didn't reek of desperation. Kendra moved through the library, her cleaning rag tracing book spines her father had once read aloud to her, feeling his absence like a wound that wouldn't heal. 3 years had passed since the stroke that stole him from her, and in that time, the house had been gutted from within, stripped of warmth like bark peeling from a dying tree. Vanessa had operated with surgical efficiency. Before the funeral flowers wilted, she'd changed the locks. Bank accounts intended for Kendra's future had been rerouted into trusts bearing only Vanessa and Tiana's names. Piece by piece, every trace of Kendra's mother, the first Mrs. Bennett, with her warm smile and gentle hands, was systematically deleted. Her jewelry funded Tiana's shopping sprees. Her grand piano was sold to cover Vanessa's gambling debts at exclusive underground clubs. Kendra had witnessed it all from the margins. At 19, she'd been a daughter. At 20, an inconvenience. By 22, she was unpaid help. "You missed the baseboards in the south wing." Vanessa's voice drifted from the doorway, cold and cutting. Kendra didn't jump anymore. She simply adjusted her position, fingers cramping around the polish bottle. She studied the woman who'd replaced her mother, beauty maintained through expensive procedures and borrowed status, wrapped in a silk robe purchased with the last of the family's liquid assets. "The appraisers come Friday," Vanessa continued, her tone deceptively casual but laced with threat. "This place needs to be immaculate. If they see a single flaw, they'll assume the Bennett name is as decayed as the finances." "My father built something that mattered," Kendra said quietly, though her pulse hammered against her ribs. Vanessa's laugh was sharp and brittle. "Your father built a fantasy, Kendra. He thought sentiment mattered more than strategy. Now his legacy is drowning in red ink, and I'm tired of looking at it. If you want shelter, stop playing the martyr and start acting like the staff you are." Kendra turned back to her work, the familiar sting of those words no less painful for their repetition. She remembered when her father had called this house her foundation. He'd never imagined that once he was gone, that foundation would become an anchor dragging her under. As afternoon light faded, casting skeletal shadows across the library floor, Kendra understood the full scope of what had been stolen. It wasn't just money or heirlooms. Vanessa had taken the very ground beneath her feet. While Tiana spent days at luxury spas perfecting her socialite persona, Kendra had been relegated to the basement servants' quarters, rooms her father's staff once occupied. She'd become the forgotten daughter, a relic of better days that Vanessa was determined to erase. Every double shift at the diner to buy her own groceries, every night shivering under threadbare blankets while heat was cut to her wing of the house, every moment was proof of her systematic erasure. But as she gazed out at the overgrown estate grounds, something flickered inside her that wasn't grief. It was steel-cold determination. They'd taken her name, her home, her father's memory, but they hadn't yet broken the quiet fire burning behind her dark eyes. She didn't know yet that Vanessa's debts were about to demand payment far more personal than property. She didn't know the creditors had stopped wanting land or silver. They were coming for flesh and blood. And as Kendra watched black sedans roll up the gravel drive through the library window, she felt the first chill of an unimaginable fate approaching, a fate where being overlooked would make her the most powerful player in the game. The rumble of those black sedans was the sound of a trap snapping shut. Kendra stood at the frosted library window, watching 4 men in midnight suits step onto the gravel, their presence slicing through the fading elegance like a blade through silk. These weren't typical bank representatives. They moved with the deliberate grace of men accustomed to collecting things far more valuable than collateral. Inside the drawing room, tension crackled. Vanessa perched on a velvet chair, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled panic. Across from her sat Mr. Choi, the primary investor in what remained of the Bennett empire. He didn't look like a criminal, but Vanessa's trembling hands as she offered tea revealed the truth. "This is no longer a matter of numbers, Vanessa," Mr. Choi said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "My associates aren't patient. They don't want deeds to a crumbling estate or empty warehouses. They want stability, an alliance." Vanessa swallowed hard. Eyes darted to Tiana, who scrolled through her phone with practiced boredom. "An alliance. We'll negotiate any terms, Mr. Choi, any interest rate you name." "This isn't about interest," Choi interrupted, leaning forward. "My cousin, Kang Ti-jin, heads the family now. He's a traditionalist requiring a wife to cement his position. The debt vanishes the moment a Bennett woman signs the marriage contract. Refuse, and foreclosure becomes the least of your concerns. My associates have very specific methods for dealing with thieves." The word marriage hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Kendra, hovering in the doorway, watched color drain from Tiana's face. The broken king? The man in the wheelchair? Stories of Ti-jin's ruthlessness were legend, a monster who'd survived an assassination only to emerge more vicious. "Absolutely not," Tiana snapped, dropping her phone. "I'm not spending my life as a glorified nurse for someone who can't even walk. It's revolting. Do you know what people say about him? He's a butcher, Mother. I'd rather be homeless." Vanessa grabbed Tiana's hand, voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "Tiana, understand what's at stake. If we don't settle this, we lose everything. We'll be on the street by dawn." "I don't care." Tiana stood, eyes flashing with secret knowledge. "I'm not property you can trade." Tiana stormed out, silk dress swishing against marble. Kendra pressed against the wall to let her pass, and Tiana shoved by roughly, face twisted in fury. Kendra watched her go, sensing hidden currents she didn't yet understand. Later that night, the house felt like a mausoleum. Kendra was folding laundry in the basement when a low whistle came from the garden. She moved to the narrow window and saw Tiana huddled near the rose bushes in a trench coat wildly inappropriate for the weather. A man emerged from shadows, young and leather-jacketed, radiating cheap rebellion, the opposite of Ti-jin's dangerous refinement. Tiana threw herself into his arms with a visible desperation. "I can't do it, Jax. They're trying to sell me. They want me in that wheelchair with him." "We're leaving. Tomorrow night after the rehearsal dinner. I've got a car hidden by South Creek. We'll hit the coast. Your mother can't touch us once we cross state lines." Kendra pulled back from the window, pulse racing. Tiana wasn't just protesting. She was plotting escape. She planned to abandon the debts, the Mafia, the Bennett name. But Kendra knew Vanessa. Her stepmother wouldn't let the prize slip away easily. If Tiana disappeared, the Mafia wouldn't simply walk away. They'd look for the next available asset. As Kendra walked through darkened halls of her father's house, she felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The stakeholders didn't care which Bennett daughter wore the veil. They only cared that the contract was signed in blood. She looked at her raw, reddened hands that had scrubbed and cleaned, then at the closed drawing room door where Vanessa was likely already scheming her next move. The choice was no longer between marriage and ruin. For Kendra, the path was becoming clear. She could watch the house burn around her, or she could become the fire that saved it. But thinking of the man in the wheelchair, the ink-covered monster waiting in his penthouse, she realized the Bennett debt was about to become her personal prison, or perhaps her only path to freedom. The wedding morning arrived not with celebration, but suffocating fog that wrapped the Bennett estate like a burial shroud. Inside, silence reigned until a scream tore through the master suite. Kendra was in the laundry room, surrounded by the sting of starch and bleach, when shattering glass echoed from upstairs. She found Vanessa frozen in Tiana's bedroom, face ashen with horror. The ivory wedding gown hung on the vanity like a ghost, but the girl meant to wear it was gone. The window stood open, sheer curtains snapping in damp breeze, and a frantic handwritten note lay crumpled on the floor. Tiana had chosen Jax over the crown, the road over the debt. "She's gone," Vanessa whispered, voice trembling with lethal fury. "The little fool actually ran. She's destroyed us." Below, gravel crunched under tires. The Mafia didn't believe in fashionably late. 3 black SUVs pulled up with the synchronized precision of a firing squad. Kang Tae-jin's men had arrived to collect their prize, and they weren't the type to accept refunds. Vanessa's head snapped toward the doorway, eyes locking on Kendra. In that moment, predatory calculation returned to her gaze, sharper and more desperate than ever. She didn't see her stepdaughter. She saw a last-minute solution. "Get in here," Vanessa commanded, voice suddenly cold and steady as a heartbeat. "Vanessa, what are you—" Diana didn't finish. Vanessa lunged forward, grabbing Kendra's arm with survival-driven strength. She dragged her toward the full-length mirror, fingers digging into skin. "Tiana is gone. If those men enter this house and find an empty altar, they won't just take the property. They'll take our lives. Do you understand? They'll burn this estate with us inside." "You can't do this," Kendra gasped, struggling. "I'm not Tiana. They'll know. Tae-jin will know." "He's never seen her face," Vanessa hissed, throwing Kendra into the vanity chair. "The contract says a Bennett daughter. It doesn't specify which one. You have her height, her eyes. Under a heavy veil, you're whoever I say you are." With frantic, trembling energy, Vanessa began stripping Kendra's simple cotton dress away. Kendra felt like a doll being prepared for a ritual beyond her comprehension. The ivory silk was ice against her skin, the corset tightening until breathing became difficult, a dress meant for royalty that felt like a gilded cage on her frame. The doorbell chimed, low and ominous, vibrating through the floorboards. "They're here," Vanessa whispered. She grabbed the heavy lace veil, its intricate embroidery shimmering in dim light. She didn't gently place it. She draped it over Kendra like a suffocating weight, pinning it into textured curls with a violent force that drew blood. Vanessa forced Kendra to stand and turned her toward the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the forgotten daughter who scrubbed floors. She was a vision in white, dark eyes wide with restrained intensity. The veil obscured her features just enough to transform her into mystery, a sacrificial offering dressed in finest lace. "Listen carefully," Vanessa said, gripping Kendra's face, diamonds catching light like weapons. "You walk down those stairs, keep your head down, sign that contract. If you speak one word, if you try to run, you're not just killing yourself, you're ending everything your father built. Do this and the debt disappears. Do this and you'll never scrub another floor." Heavy footsteps sounded in the hallway, disciplined, synchronized tread of men who lived by the gun. A sharp knock followed. "The boss is waiting," a deep, accented voice called through wood. Vanessa straightened Kendra's shoulders, expression shifting into practiced tragedy of a mother losing her daughter. She leaned in, breath smelling of bitter almonds and expensive gin. "Go on, Kendra. Go meet your husband." As the door swung open and hallway light spilled in, Kendra felt air leave her lungs. She stepped forward, the heavy train hissing against the floor like a serpent. She wasn't just walking toward an altar, she was walking into a lion's den, and as she caught sight of the man in the wheelchair at the grand staircase's end, his jawline sharp, his gaze steady and terrifying, she realized the empty altar was about to be filled with something no one expected: truth. The penthouse was a temple of glass and calculated power, overlooking a Manhattan that sparkled like scattered diamonds against black velvet. For Kendra, however, the panoramic view felt like standing at the world's edge. She stood in the master suite's center, ivory wedding silk pooling around her feet like drifted snow. The room's silence was absolute, broken only by her ragged, hitched breathing she couldn't suppress. A fraudulent bride in a house of monsters. Kendra didn't dare move. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, dark eyes blurred with tears she refused to release. She could feel the man behind her, the legendary Kang Ti-jen. He remained in his wheelchair, a silent, immovable presence near the balcony doors. Sandalwood and expensive tobacco drifted toward her, a masculine, grounding scent that should have terrified her, yet somehow anchored her amid panic. A soft whir of electric motors hummed against marble. Ti-jin moved his chair closer until he was positioned at her peripheral vision's edge. Kendra flinched, shoulders hunching instinctively, waiting for cold interrogation, demands to know why a servant had been sent to his bed instead of the socialite he'd purchased. Instead of anger, there was only crisp fabric rustling. "In this house, we don't weep for those who would have watched us drown," Ti-jin said. His voice was low, resonant vibration, not a villain's raspy snarl, but the calm, disciplined tone of a man who'd mastered his own pain long ago. Kendra gasped, head snapping up in surprise. She found him watching her, sharp features softened by the fireplace's dim amber light. He wasn't looking at her with predatory hunger of a mafia boss or disgust of a cheated businessman. He looked at her with quiet, soul-deep recognition. He reached into his tailored black suit's breast pocket and withdrew a square of pristine silk. With a steady hand, one traced with dark, intricate clan tattoos, he held it out to her. "Clean your face, Kendra," he commanded gently. "The Bennett debt was paid the moment you stepped into the foyer's light. You owe them nothing more, not even your grief." Her name on his lips felt like a blessing. Kendra reached out, fingers trembling as she took the handkerchief. The silk was cool and substantial, smelling faintly of cedar. "You knew," she whispered, voice cracking. "You knew I wasn't Tiana." "I knew the moment I saw your hands at the rehearsal dinner 3 nights ago," Ti-jin replied, gaze dropping to her raw, reddened knuckles, permanent marks of her servant life. "Tiana Bennett has never worked a day in her life. Her hands are soft and her heart is hollow. I didn't trade my family's protection for a porcelain doll, Kendra. I traded it for the woman brave enough to stay when everyone else ran." Kendra blotted her eyes, the weight of 3 years of humiliation suddenly feeling lighter. She looked at the man in the wheelchair, seeing strength in his shoulders and iron discipline in his steady gaze. He was a broken king to the world, a man the city pitied or feared,
but in the intimacy of the penthouse, he felt like the only solid thing she'd ever known.
They think they won, Kendra said, a spark of her father's old fire lighting her eyes. Vanessa and Tiana think they cheated you. Taijin's lips curved into a ghost of a smile, sharp and dangerous, sending a different kind of shiver down her spine. They think they threw you to a monster to save themselves. They don't realize that monsters know exactly how to cherish the only beautiful thing they've ever been given. He gestured toward the master bath, where steam was already beginning to purl around the doorframe. Wash the scent of that house off your skin. Tomorrow, the world sees a new Mrs. Kang, but tonight, you simply rest. You're safe here, Kendra. My walls are thicker than your stepmother's spite. As Kendra turned toward the warmth, silk handkerchief clutched tightly, she realized 3 years of silence had finally ended. She'd been sold as a sacrifice, but as she looked back at Taijin, who sat like a vigilant guardian against the city's darkness, she knew she hadn't been exiled. She'd been claimed. The following week had been a blur of silent luxury, sharp contrast to years of cold labor. But tonight, the penthouse atmosphere felt different. The air was charged with heavy electric stillness that hummed beneath the floorboards. Kendra stood by the window of their shared suite, watching moonlight reflect off the steel skyline, her mind racing with Taijin's quiet kindness, the designer clothes that actually fit, meals he insisted they share, and the way he spoke to her as if her opinion was the only one that mattered. She heard his wheelchair's soft hum as he entered. He didn't stop by the desk as usual. Instead, he moved toward the heavy mahogany door. Kendra turned, breath catching as she watched his tattooed hand reach out. With a deliberate metallic click, he turned the deadbolt. The sound felt final. "Taijin," she whispered, heart beginning a frantic beat. He didn't answer immediately. He sat there for a moment, gaze fixed on the locked door, broad shoulders squared. "For 2 years," he began, voice dropping into a register so low it was almost a growl. "The world has looked at me and seen a broken man. My enemies grew bold. They stopped hiding their knives because they thought I couldn't reach them. They thought a man in a chair was a man without teeth." Kendra took a step forward, brow furrowed. "I don't understand." Taijin turned his head, sharp eyes locking onto hers with intensity that pinned her in place. "The accident that paralyzed me was no accident. It was a calculated strike by men I once called brothers. I survived, but I realized that as long as I was a threat, they'd keep swinging. So I gave them what they wanted. I gave them a king who couldn't stand." Then the world seemed to slow. Taijin placed his hands on the armrests, his knuckles whitened and forearm muscles corded with tension. Slowly, with fluid, lethal grace that defied everything Kendra had been told, he rose. Kendra's gasp was swallowed by the room's silence. She watched in stunned disbelief as he stood to his full, towering height. He was massive, a pillar of strength and ink, his tailored suit hanging perfectly off a body that was anything but broken. He took a step toward her, his stride steady and predatory, until he stood directly in her space, forcing her to look up, way up, to meet his gaze. "You can walk," she breathed, hand flying to her mouth. "I can do much more than walk, Kendra," he said, his voice now a warm, protective shadow over her. He reached out, large hand cupping her jaw, thumb grazing the soft skin of her cheek. "I've been playing a long game. I needed a wife who wasn't part of their circle, someone who wouldn't report back to the vipers in my cabinet. I saw you at that diner months ago, exhausted but still giving your last bit of energy to help an old man cross the street. I saw you in that library, surrounded by ghosts of your father's books, holding on to your dignity while Vanessa tried to strip it away." He leaned down, forehead resting against hers, his scent of cedar and power enveloping her. "I chose you because I saw your heart, Kendra. I saw a survivor who didn't let the world turn her bitter. I didn't marry you to settle a debt. I married you because you were the only person in this city of monsters who deserved to sit on a throne." Kendra felt a tear escape, but this time it wasn't born of fear. It was the overwhelming weight of being seen. For years she'd been a ghost, a servant, forgotten. Now she was standing in the arms of a man who'd built a fortress of lies just to keep his true strength secret. And he'd invited her inside.
"They think I'm a victim," he whispered against her skin, grip on her waist tightening with fierce, possessive promise. "They think you're a consolation prize. Let them keep thinking that until it's too late. From this moment on, we're the only two people in this world who know the truth. You are my eyes, Kendra, and I am your shield." As the realization of her new reality settled in, Kendra reached up, fingers tracing the ink on his neck. She wasn't just a Mafia bride. She was the secret weapon of a king who'd finally decided to stand up. The transformation of Kendra Bennett didn't happen in a single moment, but in a series of breathtaking gilded revelations for the world that had once overlooked her. It began with the trunks, vast leather-bound chests embossed with the Kang seal that filled the dressing suite with the scent of fresh silk and Italian leather. Taijin watched from his chair by the window, expression unreadable, but his eyes tracking every flicker of emotion on Kendra's face as she touched the fabrics. He'd opened the world to her, handing her a black titanium card that carried more weight than her father's entire lost estate. To Kendra, who'd spent years counting pennies for bread, the sheer gravity of this wealth felt like new oxygen, thin, heady, dangerously sweet. "I don't know how to be this person," Kendra whispered, fingers trailing over a gown of midnight velvet. "Tiana was raised for this. I was raised to be the shadow."
"Tiana was raised to be decoration," Taijin replied, his voice a low, grounded vibration that settled the fluttering in her chest. "You were raised to survive. Decorations break under pressure, Kendra. Survivors rule. Wear the dress, not because it's pretty, but because it's armor." Under his silent direction, the forgotten daughter was systematically dismantled and rebuilt. He didn't just give her things, he gave her the power that came with them. He sent her to the city's most exclusive boutiques with a phalanx of silent, suited guards, ensuring that the same shopkeepers who'd once sneered at her diner-stained clothes now bowed until their foreheads nearly touched glass counters. He replaced her rusted compact car with a sleek obsidian SUV that purred with lethal hidden strength. He filled her vanity with jewels that caught light like trapped stars, each piece a message to the underworld that the woman beside King Taijin was untouchable. But the true spoiling wasn't in the objects. It was in the way Taijin looked at her when she entered a room. He treated her with fierce, unwavering reverence Kendra had never known. He seated her at the head of the table during private briefings, forcing his captains to address her as they would him. He spent hours in the penthouse's quiet, teaching her the business's nuances, showing her that the Gilded Queen was more than a title, it was a position of war. News of the paralyzed boss and his mysterious, elegant bride began leaking into social columns that Vanessa and Tiana monitored like hawks. Photos of Kendra, caught in paparazzi flash as she stepped from a private jet or entered a gala, began circulating. She looked radiant, warm brown skin glowing against white lace and dark silk, her posture upright and alert, dark eyes no longer reflecting fear, but quiet, searing intensity. In the Bennett house, the air was likely turning sour with envy. Tiana, who'd eloped to live free, was now discovering that freedom without a throne was just another word for struggle. She'd escaped a wheelchair, but walked away from an empire. And Kendra, the girl they'd discarded like trash, was now holding the keys to the kingdom. Taijin leaned back in his chair one evening, watching Kendra practice the calligraphy of her new signature, Kendra Kang. He reached out, tattooed fingers interlacing with hers, grounding her in the reality of their partnership. "They see the gowns and cars," he murmured, thumb grazing her knuckles. "They see the gold, but they don't see the woman who stayed when the world was burning. That's why I spoil you, Kendra. Not because I can, but because you're the only thing in this city that isn't for sale." Kendra looked at him, the weight of diamonds around her neck feeling lighter than the devotion in his eyes. She wasn't just a placeholder anymore. She was a queen, forged in shadows and polished in light. And for the first time in her life, she didn't just belong, she led. The flickering light of a cheap television was the only illumination in the cramped, salt-aired motel room where Tiana Bennett now sat.
It was a far cry from the Bennett estate. The air here smelled of stale cigarettes and regret, and the freedom she'd chased with Jax had quickly curdled into bitter reality of missed meals and dwindling cash. Vanessa paced the small space like a caged predator, designer heels clicking frantically on stained linoleum. She tracked Tiana down a week ago, not from maternal love, but because they were both sinking, and news from Manhattan was like salt in an open wound. "Look at her," Tiana hissed, voice trembling as she pointed at the screen. The nightly news was broadcasting a segment on a high-profile charity gala. The camera panned to a black Obsidian SUV, and the world seemed to hold its breath as the door opened. Kendra stepped out, draped in a gown of midnight velvet that shimmered like oil on water. A necklace of trapped stars caught light at her throat, diamonds costing more than the Bennett estate's entire remaining equity. She looked radiant, warm brown skin glowing, posture no longer hunched in servitude, but upright and regal. Beside her, Kang Taijin sat in his chair, tattooed hand resting possessively on her waist as paparazzi flashes turned night into noon. "That should have been me," Tiana whispered, eyes wide with jagged green-eyed fury. "That's my dress. Those are my diamonds. She's living my life." Vanessa stopped pacing, eyes narrowing as she watched Kendra lean down to whisper something into Taijin's ear, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. "We thought we were sending her to a slaughterhouse," Vanessa murmured, voice low poison. "We thought he was a broken man who would break her. Instead, we handed the forgotten Dada the keys to the most powerful vault in the city." The realization hit them like a physical blow. They hadn't escaped a burden, they'd discarded a winning lottery ticket. Tiana looked at her own chipped nails and the cheap motel bed, then back at the screen where Kendra was being escorted into the ballroom like royalty. The envy was a living thing, a monster clawing at her throat. "He doesn't know the truth," Tiana said, desperate, manic light entering her eyes. "He thinks he married a Bennett. He doesn't know she's just the help we dressed up in my old clothes. If the mob family, if his own clan finds out he was tricked, they'll discard her. He'll have to divorce her to save his reputation." Vanessa's lips curled into a slow, predatory smile. The practiced mask of the socialite returned, her mind already spinning a web of digital and social destruction. "He's a man of pride, Tiana. A mafia boss can't afford to be seen as a fool duped by a servant and her scheming stepmother. If we reveal the bride swap publicly, it won't matter how much he likes her. The rules of his world will force him to cast her out." "And then?" Tiana asked, breath hitching. "And then," Vanessa replied, reaching out to stroke her daughter's hair, "the seat beside him will be empty again, and this time we'll make sure the real bride is there to fill it. We'll tell the world Kendra kidnapped you. We'll say she forced you to run so she could steal your life." It was a lie, beautiful and lethal. They began gathering remaining resources, old photos of Kendra in her diner uniform, records of her father's charity toward her, phone numbers of gossip columnists Vanessa had spent years cultivating. They didn't see Kendra as family. They saw her as a thief who'd stolen a throne that was theirs by birthright.
As night wore on, the two women huddled over a laptop, blue light reflecting in their eyes like cold glow of predators. They were ready to set the city on fire just to watch Kendra burn. They didn't know about the locked door in the penthouse. They didn't know about the man who stood when the world wasn't looking. They thought they were hunting a maid, but they were about to walk into the den of a king who'd already decided that Kendra was the only thing worth protecting. The trap was set, but Vanessa and Tiana didn't realize they were the ones walking into the cage. It began at the city's most exclusive gala, a night where air was thick with the scent of lilies and quiet hum of dangerous power. Vanessa had spent her last remaining favors to secure an invitation, and Tiana stood beside her, draped in a borrowed dress that felt like cheap imitation of the midnight velvet Kendra had worn on the news. They watched from the mezzanine as Kendra entered the ballroom, hand resting on Tijin's wheelchair armrest. She looked every bit the Mafia queen, eyes sharp, presence commanding. Vanessa didn't waste a moment.
She moved toward the circle of Mafia elders, gray-haired men with cold eyes who sat like statues at the room's back. With practiced, tragic tremble in her voice, she laid out the truth. She produced photos of Kendra in her diner uniform, records of her father's debt, and the narrative of a scheming servant who'd kidnapped her daughter and stolen her place at the altar. "My daughter Tiana was the one promised to you," Vanessa pleaded, voice loud enough to draw the surrounding crowd's attention. "This woman is an imposter, a fraud who manipulated your boss to satisfy her own greed. She has insulted the Kong name." The ballroom fell into suffocating silence. The elders turned stony gazes toward Tijin. Simultaneously, Tiana saw her opening. She slipped through the crowd, approaching Tijin's side as Kendra was momentarily sidelined by the elder scrutiny. Tiana leaned down, letting her hair brush his shoulder, voice a desperate, sultry whisper. "She's a lie, Tijin," Tiana murmured, fingers trailing near his tattooed neck. "I'm the one you were promised. I'm the one who belongs in your bed. Let me fix this. Let me be the bride you deserve." Tijin didn't flinch. He didn't even look at her. Instead, his hand, the one covered in clan ink, clamped around Tiana's wrist with the force of a steel trap. The room's silence grew heavy, a physical weight making it hard to breathe. "You think I don't know who I married?" Tijin's voice wasn't a whisper. It was a low, grounded roar echoing off vaulted ceilings. He didn't just speak, he acted. To the collective gasp of every soul in the ballroom, the broken king placed his hands on the armrests. With fluid, terrifying grace, he rose. He stood to his full, towering height, dwarfing the terrified Tiana and ashen-faced Vanessa. The secret was out, but it wasn't a revelation of weakness. It was a declaration of war. He looked down at Tiana, eyes cold enough to freeze blood in her veins. "You ran because you were too weak to face a man you thought was broken. You eloped with a boy who couldn't even pay your bus fare, and now you come here into my house and insult my wife." Tijin turned his gaze to Vanessa and the elders, voice ringing with absolute authority. "Kendra didn't steal a place. I chose her. I watched her survive your cruelty for years, and I decided she was the only woman in this city worthy of the Kong name. You didn't trick me, Vanessa. You gave me the only diamond in your house of glass because you were too blind to see its value." He reached out, arms sliding around Kendra's waist, pulling her flush against his side. "This is my wife. She is the queen of the Kong family, and anyone who dares call her a fraud or tries to touch what belongs to me will find out exactly why they call me a monster." Vanessa's evidence was swept off the table by a silent guard, and within seconds, she and Tiana were being dragged toward the exit, their screams for mercy muffled by music that Tijin signaled to resume. They'd come to ruin Kendra's reputation, but had only succeeded in proving her power. They were cast out into the night, penniless and permanently exiled from the world they'd tried so hard to reclaim. Kendra looked up at the man standing beside her, the man who'd risked his greatest secret just to shield her honor. The fear was gone. In its place was fierce, unwavering pride. She wasn't the forgotten daughter anymore. She was the woman who'd helped a king stand up. And as they stood together in the room's center, she knew the world was finally theirs. The morning after the gala, the Bennett estate felt smaller than Kendra remembered. As she stepped out of the obsidian USV, gravel crunching under designer heels, she didn't feel the phantom weight of silver trays or the basement stamp chill. She wore a suit of ivory silk, posture graceful and unyielding, while the silent, towering presence of Tijin walked beside her. The world still whispered about the miracle of his recovery, but as Tijin reached out to catch Kendra's hand, grip steady and warm, she knew the only miracle was the one they'd built together. Inside the foyer, Vanessa and Tiana were waiting, surrounded by packed suitcases and the wreckage of their failed coup. They looked haggard, eyes darting between Tijan's formidable height and the legal documents Kendra held. "Kendra, please," Vanessa began, voice cracking, stripped of its usual honeyed venom. "We're family. You can't just throw us out. Think of what your father would say." "My father would ask where his legacy went. He'd ask why my daughter was treated like a ghost in her own home while you bled his life's work dry." Kendra placed the documents on the marble table, the same table she'd scrubbed until her knuckles bled. "I've settled every cent of the debt my father left behind. The Bennett name is clear, but the estate belongs to the Kong family now." Kendra leaned in, dark eyes flashing with 3 years of suppressed justice. "You have 10 minutes to take what you can carry. If you ever set foot on this property or approach me or my husband again, the police will be the least of your concerns. Tijan's associates aren't as patient as I am." Tiana let out a jagged sob, reaching for Kendra's sleeve, but Tijan stepped forward. He didn't say a word, but the cold intensity in his gaze, the gaze of a man who'd hunted traitors while the world thought him helpless, sent her reeling back. "Go," Kendra commanded.
She watched from the grand doorway as the 2 women who defined her misery were ushered into a waiting taxi, carrying nothing but remnants of their greed. There was no joy in the moment, only profound, echoing peace. The forgotten daughter had finished her work. When the gates finally swung shut, Tijan turned to her. He didn't look like a boss or a monster. He looked like a man who'd finally found his North Star. He pulled her into his arms, forehead resting against hers. "The debt is paid, Kendra," he murmured, tattooed fingers tracing the line of her jaw. "The house is quiet. What happens now?" Kendra looked out at the city skyline, where the penthouse waited, their true home, high above the wolves and whispers. She thought of the journey from the serving station to the throne, from the wheelchair to the standing king. "Now," Kendra said, a small, dangerous smile playing on her lips as she leaned into his strength, "we show this city how a king and queen really rule." As they drove away from the ghosts of the past, the sun caught their wedding rings, casting golden light over the path ahead. They were no longer broken, no longer hiding, no longer alone. They were the new rule, and Manhattan belonged to them.